If Stefan had grown tired of warring with the Ottoman Empire, he was yet to show it. He hadn't backed down before, and he wasn't going to now. The Moldavians' counterpart furthermore had shown remarkable resilience over the years, fighting both Stefan and his neighbors. Neither was going to give up, and thus the rivalry was surely endless. At least until death do them part, and that's exactly what happened. Sultan Mehmed, the great conqueror of Constantinople, died on May 3rd, 1481. The death of Stefan's peer was far from the end of the war between the Ottomans and the Moldavians, but it meant another crucial pause in battle. With the Sultan dead, a clash for who would succeed the throne followed, forcing the Ottomans to pull their attention away from Stefan and his principality. While Mehmed's sons, Chaim and Bayezid II, turned their animosity towards each other, the Moldavian prince decided to slip back into Wallachia and settle some unfinished business with yet another one of his former protégés, Basarab IV. It would come as no surprise when the master ruthlessly defeated the student. Stefan discarded Basarab and placed another man, the half-brother of Vlad Dracula, also named Vlad, on his empty throne. As was the pattern, Basarab soon returned with Ottoman troops in tow, but Stefan had won by skill, not luck, the last time. Thus, not only would Basarab lose again, but this time he was slain in the process. Vlad the monk, as Stefan's somewhat distant relative was known, was secured for the time being as the ruler of Wallachia, but his support in Moldavia would soon be called into question when the Ottomans came knocking. Despite his endorser's current conflicts with the past sultan and his new successor Bayezid, Vlad would accept vassalship under the Ottomans as many of his predecessors had done before. And while Stefan himself was no stranger to doing just that, it had not been his plan now, and Vlad the monk had put himself on thin ice. Prioritizing strategy and timing over his immediate disapproval, Stefan opted to leave his new failed puppet for a bit longer. Instead of invading Wallachia again just yet, the Prince of Moldavia was tactically bulking up his border while looking to new nations for fresh support. In his search, he found Ivan III of Moscow, who would soon form a notable bond with Stefan. This was a great secret weapon for the latter, though it wouldn't yet come in much handy, as 1484 would see the Ottomans return their focus to subduing the wily Moldavian. In 1483, the new Sultan Bayezid and Hungary's Matthias Corvinus had finally come to an agreement of their own and signed another peace treaty to last 5 years, possibly due to Corvinus's need to focus on his unrelated plans in the West. Whatever the reason, the truce was set to include Moldavia as well, although it was agreed that the ports of Stefan's principality would be the exception. And in case anyone had been unsure as to why, the Ottomans soon gave an explanation by launching a new campaign to seize Kilia and later Citata Alba, giving Bayezid and his empire suzerainty over the Black Sea and an upper hand on Stefan of Moldavia yet again. The cornered voivode now had an Ottoman ally to the south, another to the west, and the Ottomans themselves on his own soil. With what one can only assume would have been an immense level of exasperation, Stefan submitted to Bayezid, utilizing his only logical method of expelling the Ottoman armies from his land. Matthias Corvinus was now in a tricky situation. On the one hand, he was determined to maintain friendly relations with Bayezid so he could focus elsewhere. And on the other, he now had a cornered and dangerous Moldavian prince who could blow the whole scheme up in a matter of minutes. Hoping to delay a reaction from the latter, It's believed that Corvinus granted Stefan the territories of Ciciu and Cetata de Baeta in Transylvania as compensation, although some historians question the timing of these gifts. Either way, Corvinus was not open to military conflicts with the Ottomans, and thus no consideration was given to the idea of letting Stefan retake his ports. Poland, contrarily, had been watching all of this unfold, and King Casimir was not as forgiving as his Hungarian peer. The idea of the Ottomans controlling Moldavia's ports and thus the surrounding area, Danube and Dnieper rivers, was an unacceptable one for Poland's Casimir. By 1485, the king had seen enough and knew it was only a matter of time before his own nation's trade with their eastern neighbors was affected by Bayezid's new territorial control. To what would have been a profound pleasure for Stefan, Casimir's disdain for the Ottoman encroachment pushed him into closer cooperation with the Moldavian. As the fall of 1485 rolled around, Stefan made his way to Poland to personally pay homage to the king and solidify their renewed friendship. Casimir repaid the prince by declaring his opposition to Bayezid's snatching of the Moldavian ports and vowed to never accept the territorial changes without Stefan's personal consent. As invigorating as this all must have been for the voivode, he still mustn't have been surprised to hear that, in his absence, the Ottomans had re-entered Moldavia. Luckily, not much had been done by the time Stefan and his new Polish supporting forces came racing back to Moldavian land. The attackers were routed by the year's end, although the Ottomans still controlled Cetata Alba and Kilia. This would have been inordinately aggravating for Stefan, considering the desperate amount of times he'd had to go to war for Kilia in particular over the decades, even having betrayed his own cousin and been permanently wounded for a losing battle over it. It's not surprising then that a few months later, the voivode again tried to recapture his ports, but still, he couldn't seem to best his foes, a common trend for anyone attacking the fortresses. Having scarcely survived this defeat, Stefan again was painfully forced to consider renegotiating with the Ottomans and paying homage once more to his great dismay. Having been so hopeful at the start of this newest struggle, it seems the Moldavian prince quickly became aware that Poland's support wasn't enough. He thus signed a new truce with Bayezid, promising 3 more years of paying tribute and accepting vassalship. If any part of Stefan had held out hope that his Polish friends would continue the fight without him, as 1489 rolled around, those hopes would have been dashed. Casimir and Bayezid made peace, and the former seemed to have forgotten his existing agreement with the Prince of Moldavia. The King of Poland gave his own consent for the official acknowledgement of the Ottoman capture of Kilia and Cetata Alba. Stefan, again cornered, saw this as a complete betrayal and breach of his alliance with Casimir, ironically swaying his loyalty back towards the man who'd lost it just before, Matthias Corvinus. Stefan's objective was thus to re-strengthen his relationship with the King of Hungary, as that was by now his best option to protect himself and oppose the Ottoman overreach. Unfortunately for the voivode, much like his plan to solidify Vlad Dracula once more as his next-door neighbor and ally, this one too ended in death. Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary, died on April 6, 1490. In a similar fashion to the death of Sultan Mehmed, a succession crisis erupted before the ruler's body could even go cold. There would be 4 claimants to the dead man's throne. Corvinus himself had attempted to groom his illegitimate son John for the role, but with his death died that dream. His challengers included 2 sons of Polish King Casimir, John Albert and Vladislaus, as well as Maximilian I of the Holy Roman Empire and Habsburg dynasty. Now, Stefan had to decide who to support if he was to continue siding with the Hungarians over the Poles and Ottomans. Possibly due to his own approval of Stefan, The Moldavian chose to back Maximilian. Standing behind Casimir's sons could risk a future unification of both his unstable, off-and-on allies, but there apparently wasn't much benefit from backing John Corvinus either. It would eventually be Vladislaus, however, who would be crowned as Matthias' successor. While Maximilian accepted this outcome and simply abandoned his own claim, John Albert wasn't so quick to give up. Brothers or not, Albert did not want Vladislaus on the throne. This made Stefan's life more complicated, as he now had to decide who to support between the two men he had particularly hoped not to see succeed. Knowing that John Albert was already the chosen heir to Casimir's throne in Poland, the voivode eventually opted to endorse Vladislaus, predicting that this case would make a union between Hungary and Poland less likely. Not only had Stefan been stabbed in the back by his Polish ally after the conflict with the Ottomans, but he'd also been tussling with the Poles over the territory of Pokutia, which the prince felt entitled to take back into Moldavian control. If John Albert ever ascended to the thrones of both Hungary and Poland, Stefan would lose his ability to switch up alliances at will, as he'd done all these years, and he would quite possibly be making an enemy out of two kingdoms. Thus, Stefan doubled down on his newfound support of Vladislaus, giving him aid when the Ottomans invaded Hungary throughout the low-boiling succession crisis that was still ongoing. He was repaid by the rightful king, who responded by confirming Moldavia's claim to the Transylvanian holdings previously granted to Stefan by Matthias Corvinus. And finally, for Stefan, it appeared that one of his ideals was working out. By the end of 1491, John Albert had finally accepted his brother's place on the Hungarian throne. But the following year, yet another death would stir up new drama. The voivode again had to navigate a neighboring change of power when King Casimir IV died in the summer of 1492. Stefan's tumultuous roller coaster was far from its end.